Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast. Prime Minister and the government need to be very, very careful because the lives of our brave servicemen and women should not be put at risk, especially when we don't think that that conflict, that war is in our own national interest.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studios at GB News here in the heart of Westminster. My name is Chris Philp and I am the channel's political editor. Now, do not adjust your podcast settings. This is not Friday. This is earlier this week because simply we couldn't wait to bring you the best podcast in Westminster. So much is coming at you, live is coming at you very quickly nowadays in politics. Therefore, we've brought this podcast to you earlier than expected this week. That's because a lot is happening out there in the world. Later, I'm joined by Chris Philp. He, of course, is the Shadow Home Secretary. That's because Kemi Badenoch gave her response to the result of the Gorton and Denton by-election. She's announced a national commission on integration, on bringing people together. She's concerned about the way that podcast was carried forward. She feels that there's different ways to try and integrate the country. So this, as she calls it, a cultural integration commission will report, and Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, is part of that. Fascinating talking to him. That's later. But first, I spoke to Tan Dhesi. He is the chair of the Defence Select Committee because, as we spoke, of course, the war with Iran, with the US and Israel taking out targets, Iranian targets, and the response from the Iranian government is dominating the news agenda. And who better to speak to than the MP who speaks most for defence in Parliament? Tan, thank you for joining us on a busy day in Parliament. Thank you for coming here.
Chris, pleasure to be on the Chopper's Political Podcast.
It's great to have you here. Now, in my hand, I'm brandishing the Office of Budget Responsibility Forecasting, the fiscal outlook. In here, there's not much mention of defence spending, and you are a champion of defence and defence spending in House of Commons. Are you worried that there's no idea here about accelerating that target of increasing spending?
Well, the Defence Committee collectively welcomed the government's commitment to get to 2.5% of GDP spending on conventional defence by 2027. However, many of us also feel that it's not enough given the current geopolitics, given the tense international climate, and also given the threats that we face within our continent. We know about the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We know also, in terms of the Defence Committee, has done an inquiry into defence in the grey zone, looking at hybrid threats. So grey zone is everything that is happening beneath the threshold, certain things that are happening whereby adversaries can say, well, look, it's not me, Gov. It must be somebody else.
He's doing it.
That's it. So that's why we say we're not in a state of war, but then we're not in a state of peace either. It's that grey zone where a lot of the attacks are, and they are especially in the form of cyber attacks. And the UK is the third most targeted nation on the planet in terms of cyber attacks. So I fully get what the government is saying. Well, look, okay, the government is spending more on defence in terms of an increase in investment since the end of the Cold War. However, we feel that we should be getting to 3% in this Parliament.
That means by 2029.
That's it. And so that, therefore, we're looking to have that increase in spending. I've raised this, by the way, with the Prime Minister in the Liaison Committee. I've raised this on the floor of the House with the Defence Secretary, Foreign Secretary and others, that the government collectively and the Cabinet needs to realise that if we are to show leadership on this, and given not just the threat that we face from Putin, but also given Donald Trump's assertions that he is no longer as interested in the defense of our European continent, and he is now more focused on homeland security and threats in the Indo-Pacific and in the Western Hemisphere, we then now need to step up to the plate. But can we meet the moment? And that, at the moment, it's not the case.
So the target is to get to 2.5% of GDP on national economic output by April 2027, and then 3% in the next Parliament, which means by 2035. But you think do it by 3% by 2029. It's reported that aides around the Prime Minister are keen for this, but the Treasury is reticent. That may explain why it's not in the forecasting in the spring statement.
Well, either which way, number 10, number 11, they need to get together because, remember, the Prime Minister and the UK government have committed to those NATO targets. So they are 3.5% by 2035 on conventional defense spending, an extra 1.5% on defense and security related matters. So overall, that's where that 5% target comes. But if we just take the conventional spend, which would be the usual Ministry of Defense spend, that if we are to reach that by 2035, we need to do it not just into the famine and feast, we need to do it in a gradual way. So whether that's 0.1% increase a year, whether it's 0.2% a year, in order to get to that agreed target by 2035, we feel that we need to move at pace. And that's why the Defence Committee, in its recent report, when we did an inquiry into the UK's contribution to European security, we said that certain parts of government are moving at a glacial pace, and we need to accelerate that investment in order to meet the moment.
While I've been speaking to you, I've had a detective number 10 Downing Street. They've been sending me the Keir Starmer's message on Twitter.
You get more text messages than I do. God, Chris is
buzzing,
well connected.
buzzing.
Number 10 of the Prime Minister, right?
I'll read it out to you because you might want to comment on this. The UK is committed to securing the Cyprus base, Akrotiri, of course. The PM has spoken with the President of Cyprus.
Yeah.
We are, as a country, sending helicopters with counter-drone capabilities and HMS Dragon.
HMS Dragon.
They're saying Dragon is sent deployed to the region, not Duncan, Dragon, but always acting in interests of the UK allies. That is a step up. That is putting UK troops in harm's way. Your reaction, please?
Oh, definitely. Look, we need to make sure, and I raised this on the floor of the House when the Prime Minister made his statement with regards to the war that we now find, this new conflict in the Middle East. And while I acknowledge that what the Prime Minister said, that the UK has not been involved in those original Israeli-US strikes on Iran, unfortunately, the crisis is escalating. We have not just the concerns for the millions of people living in the Middle East. In particular, there are hundreds of thousands of Brits who are living there. There are thousands in different nations, our allies, by the way, across the region, thousands and thousands in each particular nation who they're stranded there. So what the issues that I raised with the Prime Minister is, one, what are we doing to help de-escalate the situation? Secondly, what efforts is the government making to help evacuate those who actually want to come back to the UK? So that is incredibly important, because a lot of people, including my Slough constituents, they're concerned about their family members, individuals who may have gone out on holiday or who are merely transiting through either Dubai or Abu Dhabi. So all of that is incredibly important. And what we also need to do is we need to protect our British nationals, our bases, and our interests. The national interests must be protected. And in terms of RAF Akrotiri, where I had the pleasure and privilege of visiting in recent years, that is an incredibly important strategic base, sovereign base for the UK. And of course, we were all very concerned when the one-way attack drones targeted that.
One-way.
Yes.
Akrotiri.
Yeah. So we need to make sure that we are defending that. And it's good to see that that's being taken seriously, and that reinforcements are being sent in that direction.
We've been drawn into it slowly. I mean, do you think the PM was slow to step up on this? President Trump said he felt he was being a bit too legalistic. Is that understandable, given it's not really clear what the aims are? The problem with these wars are mission creep can step in and you don't know where you're going, and suddenly you've got British troops on the ground with no clear goal. Is that so? Do you understand where the PM came from on this?
Agree, Chris. Well, I have similar concerns as yours. I just think that we need to be very, very careful. This isn't our war. Right, this is
our war. Israel's ally of ours.
As in, it's a war of choice with respect to Benjamin Netanyahu. I know he's been trying to convince Donald Trump for a long time, and now he has managed to convince him, and those strikes have happened. Unfortunately, what many of us realized is if you go into something without a plan, without a strategy, then there's going to be a considerable amount of fallout. We've already seen a lot of people have lost their lives, including US servicemen. And we've also seen that there's been friendly fire. There'll be chaos. There'll be instability. a lot of innocent people will lose their lives. So we've got to make sure that it's all, regime change, which seems to be the modus operandi at the moment with regards to the US Israeli strikes, that what's the end game thereafter? We've seen that whether when we've got involved in Iraq or Afghanistan or in Libya, to decapitate the regime is one thing, but the significant fallout, and we all know what happened afterwards, for example, in the Middle East with regards to ISIS, it fanned the flames of radicalism and extremism. Is also, we need to ensure that if we're going into something, that we have sought a clear strategy. And at the moment, none of us can see that strategy.
And that's why I said to you guys in the House of Commons, the MPs, you can't do regime change from the air.
No, you can't.
And that's his point, isn't it?
100%.
But do you worry, though, that other countries have been less concerned about that? The French have been more forward-leaning into supporting the
French have
US.
been very much opposing, from my understanding, whether it's the French.
Trump praised the French, is why I say that.
Well, look, I think, from one day to the next, I think the president,
Sorry.
Donald Trump is saying one thing one day, and then the next day that changes, and so on. So for us, I think it's important that one, we're doing something that is legal, so they need to ensure that the legal advice is strong, because afterwards we will then, as in the UK taxpayer, will be hit with substantial liabilities. And that's why it's important that when the government does something, that it does have that international law regard to that. It can't just be legalities aside, as the Shadow Foreign Secretary said. That just doesn't work. And also, what needs to happen is that we now need to have that defensive formation. So I'm glad that the UK has allowed the US permission to make sure that the
Targeted strikes, though.
defensive targeted strikes,
Yeah.
whether it's at sites that are launching missiles or launching drones, I think that's incredibly important, because otherwise we will be letting down all of our friends and allies and the British nationals that are based in the Middle East.
And there's 300,000 people in the area, at least 300,000. And it might add partners, it might be more than that.
Agreed. And then look, individuals like, for example, the nations like Qatar. Now, they are very, very close allies. We're dependent on them in terms of for our energy. Where also they have lots of joint exercises.
Yes.
So we're helping to train up the Qataris, and likewise that they also house bases there.
Yes.
So when they're under attack, we then need to help them.
So this claim that the PM has been led by it rather than leading is unfair. I mean, the fact that we haven't got the fact that HMS Dragon wasn't in the right place for when this war broke out, and of course the US had a lot of assets, material already in the region.
Yeah.
Are we behind the curve here?
Well,
or do you understand?
I think we were led to believe that there are negotiations underway and so on. So
we're surprised by it.
Yeah, I think everybody was taken aback by the fact that in the middle of negotiation, which seemed to be going well, and then all of a sudden they broke down, and then on that weekend, I think even US Congress, a lot of opposition within the US, including within Donald Trump's own Republican MAGA base, a lot of them said, this isn't our war. What the hell are we doing out there in the Middle East? We thought that this is about making America great again, and that you're going to focus in on the US.
No, well, foreign adventures was what he told us based.
That's right. So I know that the Democrat opposition, that they have voiced their concerns. So, given that wider context, I think it's important that we do everything sensibly, but we move assets to where they are required to protect our own interests.
No question there. Donald Trump did mention the multicultural concerns somehow delaying or causing pause amongst the Prime Minister in his reaction. Kemi Badenoch said the same thing. Is that true, do you think?
Well,
If by any means offending groups who might be sympathetic to Iran in the UK and not to offend them.
That's learning answers. And I think that, as I said on the floor of the House, the Iranian regime, including its late leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, they are no friends of our country, right? That you just have to lay out there. We know that Iran has posed a significant threat, not just to the UK and the US, but also many of our Arab allies in the Middle East. So there's a lot of contest and competition within the Middle East, and we need to make sure that everybody recognizes that. So I don't think that there was any sort of pressure. As far as we're concerned, we need to be making sure that there is proper plan and strategy in place. At the moment, the likes of me can't see anything. So
No.
we don't just want to.
And that's
go
what's
into
holding him
something.
back. So, well, history may judge what Keir Starmer did. It may be sensible or not. We're not. He's the guy who's going to decide. So,
So look, we weren't involved in the original offensive,
No.
but now, given that the Iranian regime has now suddenly decided that 1 minute, this is an existential crisis for them, so they have decided to launch missiles and drones in different directions, killing a lot of innocent people. So we need to make sure that we are working with our US and other allies to actually neutralize those threats.
What is the main aim of this conflict, do you think? What is the main aim? Is it...
At present, it just seems to be regime change that I think where they, whether it's Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu, that perhaps for them, it's a case of having a regime or a leader that it's more compliant or more amenable to them. But ultimately, I think it's for the Iranian people to decide the course of action that they want to take. But as far as we in the UK are concerned, we've got enough issues, especially with Ukraine. I think what some of us are really concerned with, Chris, is that there's some individuals will be distracted now from the crisis within our own continent. I know Donald Trump himself wasn't as forthcoming in supporting Ukraine, and he seems to be getting a bit closer to seeing Russia more as a friend rather than as a foe. For us, it's a very different outlook on life as it is for our European allies. So what we need to do is we need to support our Ukrainian friends, and we also need to work to de-escalate the situation there. And that's what many of us thought that the US was doing to ensure that that ceasefire was agreed in quick time.
Do you think we can get regime change? If that's he's in a carry for 30 days, he said. The word is Iran's got maybe a week's worth of weaponry to deal with their response, but they're trying to draw it out over a few days more than that.
Well, it's very, very difficult to tell, because when you have a conflict that you are trying to engage just via the air, remember, Iran's a very complex country.
90 million people live there.
90 plus million people. You've got different ethnic minorities. And also, since the strikes last year, they decentralized their military command structures. So that would make them even more difficult to pin down. It's not you're just looking at one institution. And I think they'd also engaged in processes that if certain individuals were assassinated, how they then kept the regime going. So they had put into place those measures. And that's why it's not as easy as it is, for example, with Maduro in Venezuela. This is a very advanced, militarily advanced nation, and that regime that has been in post for decades. So what we need to do is, one, to try to help to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah.
Secondly, to protect our own nationals, our own interests, and our own allies. And let's not get sucked into a war which will...
No obvious ending.
No obvious ending, and that could lead to significant loss of life for the Prime Minister and the government need to be very, very careful, because the lives of our brave servicemen and women should not be put at risk, especially when we don't think that that conflict, of that war, is in our own national interest. It's something that we need to negotiate a good solution, a good outcome to this.
Just finally on this area, when should MPs get a vote on what's going on? There's been history of this with, I think it was Syria, bombing of Syria, suddenly in 2003 with when I was vividly remember that, the vote in Parliament and the discussion about whether it was legal to invade Iraq. When should your colleagues, you and others, get a vote on UK, your involvement in this?
Well, there's parliamentary convention in that the government doesn't need to have a parliamentary vote if there are defensive aspects. So that if, for example, something happened on the weekend and our interests, our assets, our people were under threat, it is the government's primary duty
react to that,
to immediately react to that, to make sure that they're keeping us, our country, safe. However, if they were to engage in a war, in an offensive operation, then I think it is their duty to come and explain themselves in Parliament, for ministers to explain themselves and to get that parliamentary mandate. That's important, by the way, for not just in our democracy, but also for cohesion.
Okay, so defending Cyprus with HMS Dragon, is fine. No need
Oh,
for,
yeah,
no need for a
I
vote there.
think
because
that should be done as a matter of course.
no question. That's what the PM's ordered today. But were we to send troops into some form of ground war in Iran, that's when the vote is required.
If ever there was an operation or where we're being sucked into a war where we're sending British servicemen and women out there on the ground to engage in a conflict, then I think it's imperative that the government of the day gets that parliamentary mandate. And
Or bombing offensive sites in Iran, would that also require a vote, as happened with Syria, for example?
again, if we are engaged in a war, if we're engaged in a conflict and we're out there to bomb various sites, rather than just military assets, in terms of as we're doing at the moment, in terms of, I know some individuals may have, I can see on social media, look, what's the difference between defensive and offensive? Well, there are nuances, there are technicalities, but it is important to realize that what the US and Israel conducted were offensive strikes when Iran obviously wasn't striking themselves. That is a very different.
Whereas now we're attacking launch vehicles for drones, launch vehicles and missiles, and
we're doing so in self-defense, which is compliant with international law.
And just very finally, and it's really good to have you on the podcast. Thank you, Tam. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, in the UK is not yet prescribed.
Yeah.
Should it be?
Well, that's
in the UK.
I've been an MP for the last 9 years. We've discussed it ad nauseum. Successive governments, whether they're Conservative, whether they're Labour,
Hasn't happened yet under tour with your Labour.
That's right. So I think what the government has said is that prescribing the IRGC would be akin to prescribing the government or the regime.
Yes.
So it's that particular nuance involved. So I completely
get
get
that nuance, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why sometimes it can be very, very frustrating. We can see where the threat is, but I do acknowledge that the government needs to be acting in a legal manner. So that's, I think that
they are where they are now.
We are where we are.
That may change. Yeah. Tan Dhesi, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Chris.
Come again, and we'll be watching what happens next few days and weeks with interest and concern. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Now, this week, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, gave her response to the result of the Gordon and Denton by-election. She's concerned about the way that some communities don't talk to other communities. She wants to increase integration between us all. We all live in the community, of course, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We should all speak together, get on together. She feels there are too many walls being constructed between communities, and that must stop. She set up what she calls a Cultural and Integration Commission, examining this. And one of her shadow team involved with that is Chris Philp. And he, of course, is a shadow Home Secretary. Chris Philp, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Before we come to the speech by Kemi Badenoch this week about this Cultural and Integration Commission, which I found fascinating, and your role on that group, your quick takeaways from the spring statement.
I think it laid bare just how much Labour have failed on the economy. We've got unemployment going up. Youth unemployment is particularly bad. I think it's about 16%, higher than in Europe. So young people unable to get jobs. And this hasn't happened by accident. It's happened because Labour have massively increased taxes. They've increased regulation. And what happens when you increase tax and regulation? You get fewer jobs. And young people in particular are suffering. Labour lied during the election campaign when they said they weren't going to put up taxes. And now the British public are suffering because of Rachel Reeves' lies.
You mean the jobs tax, national insurance? You didn't mention minimum wage going up, equaling to all across all over 18s get the same. I mean, we haven't heard that, whether that might not happen now, because it is meaning some employers anecdotally are not taking on younger staff.
That's right, because they're now so expensive. Business rates are going up massively in just a few weeks' time, which will hit pubs and restaurants and high street shops. So it's a bleak economic outlook. Growth is basically flatlining. We're hardly growing. And all of that is because Labour have put up taxes. Why they put taxes up is to fund massive increases in welfare spending, and Keir Starmer is too weak to control his own backbenchers. He can't control welfare spending. So we are taxing people that are working and businesses to pay people who don't work. It is absolute insanity, and the whole country is suffering.
Just on welfare spending, yes, we go to 400 billion on welfare spending by 2030, 2031. Half of that, though, is on pension spending, but look at the detail there. Disability benefits up by 50%, 65 billion by the end of this decade. Child benefit, or only up slightly to 14, and universal credit up from 90 billion to 106 billion. So it looks like this inability to control those working benefits is part of the problem.
It certainly is. And, people on sickness benefit and all those other benefits are costing tens and tens, or now hundreds of billions of pounds. And that's why taxes are going up. And if Keir Starmer had a backbone, if he had any strength to control his backbenchers, that wouldn't be happening. What our plan is, the Conservative plan, is to cut welfare spending, frankly. And it's going to be a tough thing to do. We're going to have to do it, cut it significantly. And that will then fund tax cuts.
But net migration is down. A lot of that down to policies brought in by James Cleverly, formerly the Home Secretary, I think, at the back end of the Conservative government. 60,000 people here, fewer here every year. That means we're down to levels last seen in the coalition years in terms of net migration.
That's right. Those numbers have come down thanks to policies put in place at the end of the last Conservative government, as you said. But to be honest, numbers have been far too high. So I would like to see people that have come here recently, but who either aren't working or are on low wages, being required to leave at the end of their visa. So we actually see the numbers going down. I want to see negative net migration. I want to see more people leaving than arriving for a period of time, with the people leaving being those on low incomes or haven't been working, to avoid having to pay, in some cases, pay benefits.
And despite the impact that could have on the economy, we know how the Treasury likes to have more, and that's the problem you had through 14 years.
You know what? If people are coming here and either not working or working on very low incomes, they are not contributing to the exchequer because they're taking more in services than they're paying in tax. All we should be doing is asking those people to very politely leave at the end of their visa and stop any more coming in, and get people on benefits. Here, 9 million people, economically inactive. Let's get some of them back into the workforce by toughening out benefits instead of importing people.
For me, as an observer of politics, not a practitioner, I just think the fact that the Labour government can't cut benefits is the tragedy of this government. I mean, I think you with permission to say this to you, it's harder for a Tory government to do it because you could create a battle, don't you, with the left. I think if a left-wing government try and do it, but they haven't.
They haven't. They had a little try last year, very minor reforms, would have saved about 5 billion, I think, and they couldn't even do that. And now they've basically given up, and instead they decided to put everybody's tax up.
Now, in the wake of the Denton and Gordon by-election, your leader, Kemi Badenoch, gave a fascinating speech this week on plans for a new cultural and integration commission, looking at 6 areas. Can you summarise where we are with this? I thought it was a very, very interesting speech from the Tory leader.
So we're deeply concerned about the fact society is becoming fractured. You've got different parallel societies.
And they are developed, are they?
That don't talk to each other, and they think about their own interests instead of the national interest. And if you have a population where pretty big chunks of it don't think of themselves as primarily British, but think of themselves as part of some other identity based on race or based on religion, ultimately the nation state can't function if a significant portion of the population don't think of themselves as primarily British, don't integrate, don't assimilate. And here are some indications of where we have a problem. 1 million people living in the UK right now don't speak English properly. 25% of people born in Bangladesh now living in the UK, 25% don't speak proper English. 55% of Pakistani origin people in the UK are married to their first cousin. These are serious problems. We've seen it spilling over into elections, where in that by-election last week, we saw the Green Party shamelessly playing sectarian politics, pandering to the Muslim vote.
Urdu language videos.
Sending out Urdu language videos, saying that Labour don't care about Gaza, with pictures of the Prime Minister Keir Starmer meeting Indian Premier Narendra Modi, obviously a Hindu leader.
Nothing wrong with that. Our PM should meet the
Of course he should.
PM.
Of course he should. And David Lammy meeting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And again,
Absolutely nothing fair to the
of course they should be. I mean, whatever you think about Benjamin Netanyahu's policy, is the elected Prime Minister of Israel.
Correct.
And of course our Foreign Secretary has to meet with him and other world leaders. But the Green Party were using those photographs and these Urdu language leaflets to whip up essentially hatred amongst the Muslim community to vote against Labour. That is, and actually Labour have done this themselves in the past, in the Batley by-election and elsewhere. So they're not innocent themselves. We've also seen those 5 so-called independent MPs elected at the general election on a essentially sectarian ticket, talking primarily about Gaza as an issue. And Labour MPs, there's a Labour MP called Kate Holland, a former Labour MP, who I think was the MP in Blackburn but lost, reporting that she was intimidated by Muslim members of her constituency who were angry about her views on Gaza, and it meant she couldn't go to her house. She suffered fear and intimidation. That kind of thing is completely wrong, and it's a symptom of a society which has become segregated, and it's unacceptable in my view, because our country can't function if our society is segregated.
Let's quickly skim through the ideas, and they are absolutely fascinating, I think. Universalism, one set of rules for everyone enforced equally and fairly, Kemi Badenoch said, replacing the role of multiculturalism in schools with a national story, a civic confidence. Why not, frankly? Protect free speech, of course, that we know that's a familiar refrain from the Conservatives. Lord Young to lead that one. That's Toby Young, of course, of the Free Speech Union. An overhaul of the Equality Act, we know that too. So it prioritises meritocracy and strengthens integration, coming from a leader who's black, who doesn't like to be defined by her skin colour, simply who she is, as she says often, to the infuriation of the Labour left, and work on Islamist extremism and how it feeds into separatism. That's what you're doing. Let's come to that in 1 second. How do we get to this point? And I've got to say, you were in power for 14 years. It was under your watch. But how have we allowed these kind of communities to grow up who don't talk to their neighbours, who don't talk English, who don't really want to share in our UK culture? I mean, it really is on the watch of all parties, really, but certainly on your party too. Why has that been allowed to happen?
Well, look, we're under new leadership, and we are now in the Conservative Party taking a very different, new approach, Kemi and I. You know, she wasn't Prime Minister, I wasn't Home Secretary. We're now taking a new approach. Part of this is about numbers. The numbers that came into this country from outside Europe in the last few years have been far, far too high.
After Brexit.
Particularly after Brexit.
Yeah.
The numbers have been far too high. So first of all, we need to dramatically slash the numbers of people coming into the country, and we'll do that with a hard binding cap, just so we'll give out far, far, far fewer visas, particularly to people earning lower income. That has to stop entirely. We only want a small number of high-income people coming in. And for those who arrived recently, they're mostly here on like 5-year work visas. When those 5-year work visas come to an end, if they haven't been earning high levels of salary,
Quite high. How high?
Well, we're going to be looking at that, but it'll be at the very least the same as median earnings, maybe higher.
So 30,000.
Well, perhaps even higher than that. If they haven't been earning that level, or if they haven't been working at all, they should be required to leave because they came here to work. And if they either haven't worked or haven't worked on a decent wage, that means they're not making a contribution and should frankly leave. On the language side, it's not acceptable 1 million people can't speak English. We should completely stop funding translation services, maybe apart from the criminal justice system. Aside from that, stop all translation services. Instead, maybe put the money into English language lessons. People come to this country, they should learn English. It's as simple as that.
How about signs, like on the London Underground in different languages? Is that should we not do that?
No, I don't think we should. English is our national language.
Set them off, yeah.
English is our national language, and we should be using English everywhere, to be quite honest.
So when you have Urdu signs or different languages in different parts of London, which can almost other the station, if you said.
I would like all signs everywhere to be in English, and frankly, no other language. That's our national language. We should all speak it, and all our signs should be in English. And when it comes to so-called DEI, so having different hiring standards for different, trying to lower the bar for certain ethnic groups, I think that is wrong. We need to have a rigorous meritocracy where, of course, there should be no discrimination. Nobody should be discriminated against, but everybody should be treated the same. No special favours for certain groups. We should all of us be treated exactly
now,
the same.
left would say that they do that because black people maybe are discriminated against in the system by more likely to be stopped by the police, or more likely to have, or maybe I haven't got the detail, the figures in front of me, but they're more harshly treated, and that's why they allow for that. Of course, that's what you're arguing against.
Well, it is literally illegal to discriminate. People should all be treated exactly the same. And by the way, when it comes to stop and search, if you compare the stop and search statistics to the population, the offending population, so not the general population, but the offending population, then the stop and search is proportionate. And if you look at the percentage of stop and searches that are successful, that lead to drugs or knives being found, the success percent, which for the Metropolitan Police is about 30%, 30% they find something, a knife or drugs, 70% they don't. That 30% is about the same for all ethnic groups. It's not the case that the black community are being unfairly picked on.
Okay.
But look, there's other things as well. Things like first cousin marriage, right? I think that should be completely banned. No one should be marrying their first cousin, not least because it causes enormous numbers of congenital
Why is it happening?
birth defects.
Why is that happening?
Well, unfortunately, there are some parts of the Muslim community where it is a cultural practice that happens. I don't think it should happen. It's causing a lot of very serious health issues. 55% of Pakistani origin people in the UK, 55% have married their first cousin.
That's extraordinary.
Which is causing huge numbers of health problems in those areas.
Well, it's raised
and
as
it should
comments by Richard.
That's right.
And Richard given short shrift by the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister, because he's a weak and cowardly man, didn't answer Richard's question. The Prime Minister probably is wanting to get votes from the Muslim community, but we need to do the right thing, and we should ban first cousin marriage because it causes enormous health problems. It's really as simple as that.
Does it always extraordinary? It goes on really. Another area you're looking at, of course, with your shadow brief hat on, is Sharia courts. What are these Sharia courts?
Well, there are 85 of these courts in the UK. The UK is the Sharia capital of Europe, more here than anywhere else.
What are they, though?
Well, they effectively provide a parallel justice system. Now, they don't provide legally binding judgments in our UK law, but they provide an alternative system which some people choose to operate within.
Resolution between two parties in conflict.
Yeah, but often outside the regular civil justice system. And the problem, and there are actually equivalent courts in the Jewish system as well. But these courts often operate completely outside the civil justice system. They allow marriages to be created that are not even registered or recognised in UK law. The problem is they treat women very, very badly. And women very often don't have the rights in these courts that they would have if they had like a regular civil partnership or marriage under our legal system. There should only be one legal system in this country, in my view. So I think this.
It's not a legal system, is it? It's an area where two sides agreed to follow to agree.
But it effectively provides a parallel legal system outside of our regular civil legal system we have. And I think this commission should be looking at whether those courts should be, religious courts should be banned because they discriminate against women and they provide a parallel alternative completely outside of the legal system that Parliament has set up, and it particularly damages women's rights.
And you mentioned the Jewish faith have the similar courts. Will they be banned too, or just the Sharia?
Well, I think we should look at both sets of religious courts. The Jewish ones, I guess, will best in as well. We should examine whether there's evidence of women particularly being coerced in either system. We should look at whether these courts operate in both cases in partnership with our civil legal system or separately. And if there is evidence, and I think there is, that women are discriminated against and that the courts, particularly Sharia courts, operate completely separately to our civil legal system outside of Parliament's ability to make law, I think that is a problem, and that is part of the parallel society that we are seeking to end. There should be one society, one set of values that we share across the whole country. We can't have different communities setting up their own laws.
This idea of muscular conservatism was what we heard from the Tory leader, didn't we? And rather than being in a crouch over these areas and worried about offending groups, you want to take it on.
We need to tell the truth. We need to, frankly, our country's viability as a nation state would ultimately be threatened if we fragment into different groups that define themselves by their ethnic or their religious identity. We've seen other countries in the world where that's happened, countries like Lebanon, for example, or countries like Bosnia, which have become fractured along religious or ethnic lines. We can't have that happening in the UK. We must have everybody.
Civil war broke out in those countries.
Well, that's
not what you're saying.
That is, if you take sort of separate societies to the most extreme extent, that is where it leads. Ultimately, I'm not talking about in the near future.
Not a civil war,
but no. But look, in the very long term, and I'm not saying no. But in the very long term, a country can't function if it fragments, and we are seeing fragmentation. We have to stop that and reassert a British identity, British set of values. Of course, people will have their own identity, their own heritage, their own religion, and of course, we believe in freedom of religion and so on. But we do also need to have a British culture, identity, British values that everybody signs up to.
Chris Philp, thank you for coming in on a busy day in Parliament. I just described this new plan here, this Cultural and Integration Commission. I think it'd be fascinating to hear the results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Chris Philp and thank you to Tan Dhesi earlier. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I certainly have enjoyed making it for you. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Do tweet me your views on Chopper's Political Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please do pick up your phone and leave a 5-star rating and review of the podcast. That helps other people to find it. If they're looking for this kind of thing, they might enjoy it too. Thanks to the great team of colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh back at Base Camp, and the brilliant team of worker bees who work this podcast into the ground, making it brilliant and in fact leave me exhausted most weeks. That, of course, is Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. They love making the podcast for you. Please do send me your messages for them, and I'll pass them on to them too. Otherwise, do catch up with all our best political reporting. I'm on GB News during the week with my reporting for the channel, various hits from all over the place in Westminster, and also I, of course, write pieces and articles for gbnews.com, our fantastic website. But until next time, stay in touch, let me know what you think, and for now, cheerio!